and the transcript.
Thank you. Thank you for attending An Astronaut and Nursing a Prostitute Walk into a Library, How to Effectively Explain Our Value to Non-Catalogers, being presented by Amanda Ross. Just some housekeeping. If you would like to remove the closed captioning that we have at the bottom, there should be a live transcript CC button, or if you click on the more, there should be an option to hide the subtitles. This session is being recorded. All chats will also be recorded, including private chats, and recording of the sessions will be emailed out to registrants after the conference is over. We will be monitoring the chat, so you can enter your questions and comments there. Make sure you're sending it to everyone when you want to send a group chat. Amanda, if you want to take it away.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here today. This is probably the most fun presentation that I do. I really enjoy doing this presentation. And if you have questions, I'm fine with being interrupted. I don't have the chat up, so just let me know, or else I can wait until the end. This presentation is not intended to go into an in-depth metadata or cataloging librarian level conversation about the topics presented, because I know that there are some hot button topics that I'm going to talk about, but rather I'm intending to help explain why what you do as a cataloger or a metadata librarian is important in ways that non-tech services colleagues, friends, and family can understand. Most of my experience is with Library of Congress classification and subject headings, so that's what I'm focusing on. I'm not as good with Dewey, though there are some correlations with Dewey, but I'm assuming that since this is an ACRL conference, that most of the people attending are using Library of Congress classification and subject headings. A little bit about me. My title just changed, so I'm getting used to it. I am the coordinator of adaptive cataloging and resource management at Texas A&M. I have experience in academic libraries, public libraries, and as a contract cataloger. My professional interests are biases in cataloging and cataloging ethics. I've done a lot of work with both of those topics. I am a Gulf Coast native. Living in College Station, Texas is the farthest north I've ever lived. And my splurges every year are Aggie season football tickets. And one of my previous jobs was in New Orleans, so I'm in one of the less expensive Mardi Gras cruise with some friends. My other hobbies are playing board games and reading. So that's just a little bit about me. And my leadership philosophy is, if you won't advocate for your staff, you shouldn't be in a leadership position. Just simply put. And that's kind of where I'm coming from with this presentation. I want to help enable catalogers and metadata librarians. And if we have any administrators here, I also want them to understand a little bit more about advocating for what we do. I mean, advocacy doesn't mean that you'll always get the result that you want or that your team wants, but it is very important that, to me, that my team knows that I have their back. They do feel confident that I will go to bat for them. So getting into the meat of the presentation, the challenge that we have is that sometimes it's hard to explain what we do because we use words like MARC and specific tags, and the different words we use may sound like foreign language to other people. And I get frustrated because I hear a lot of people say that because I don't work with the public, that I'm not a real librarian. And I know a lot of colleagues have heard that as well, or that all we do is slap a barcode and a spine label on a book. I consider myself an extroverted introvert. I like my downtime. According to Myers-Briggs, I'm an introvert, but if you ask a lot of my friends, they'll tell you that I must have cheated on Myers-Briggs because they just don't believe that I'm an introvert. But most catalogers I know self-identify as introverts, so it's hard to sometimes talk about what we do. So again, that's why I'm here. And I'm going to look at this from 3 solutions. Because like I said, you want to avoid terms like mark tags, RDA, metadata, and authority control. My recent research is focused on explaining the biases in classification and subject headings to non-library audience. First is a poster for the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity in Higher Education. And later on, I wrote an article for the Conversation website. Sharing my research with non-cataloging colleagues and the general public has helped them understand why what we do is important. When I did write the article for the Conversation, just a funny little story, a week after I wrote the article, I hit 25,000 reads in the statistics. I called my mom and I told her, and she said, "Why are people still reading it?" And I told my best friend that, and he said, "Well, there's nothing like your mother telling you that you're last week's news." So, you know, she's keeping me grounded. So I think that 3 ways to explain what we do to those who are not behind the curtain with us are talking about subject headings, some of the positive changes in subject headings, and a couple of different classification dilemmas. So let's move on to my cast of characters. The astronaut is a good example of the bias of the American white male in Library of Congress classification or subject headings. Women are designated with women astronauts, and there's African American astronauts and Hispanic American astronauts, but there's no subject heading for male astronauts. A book about an astronaut who are men would just have a general subject heading of astronauts. Granted, originally it was a male-dominated profession, but that's not I mean, they're still mostly men, but there are a lot of women astronauts too. And then interestingly enough, there is no subject heading for cosmonauts for Russian astronauts. You have to put astronauts Russia or Russian Federation, I guess now. So that's you know, one of the cast of characters. Now, nurses are a little more equitably distributed in terms of subject headings, because there are also male nurse subject headings and women nurse subject headings. The reason that I did the nurse was because I was looking for subject headings for professions that, right or wrong, when you say nurse, most people, unless they know a male nurse personally, a lot of people will, if you say, you know, describe a nurse, a lot of people first think of women. I'm not saying that's right, but you know, it's traditionally women were nurses. So then the last character being the prostitute. The prostitute was the only profession, when I did my very non-scientific search of the Library of Congress subject file. Prostitute was the profession that there is male prostitutes, but there's no female prostitutes. So there's the assumption that if you say prostitute, you're probably meaning a female prostitute. Sex workers is a broader term, and it is a more preferred term by many these days, but prostitute is still the term that is used for that profession, and sex workers includes adult movie stars and other, it's a larger, broader term. So that's kind of the cast of characters and where I have come up with this. Now, librarians, since the title says, they walk into the library. Since librarians are creating the subject headings, there are a lot more librarian subject headings. However, there's still not a male librarian with subject term, which I find really fascinating. I haven't been in a position yet to be able to propose it. I don't know that it would be accepted if I proposed it, because adding a subject heading, usually you have to have a book in hand and really argue for it. So I find it very interesting that there's not a male librarian subject heading. A well-known example of that in library circles, at least, this is a topic that even outside of technical services, more and more people are familiar with, is illegal aliens. About 5 years ago, the Library of Congress announced that they were replacing illegal aliens with non-citizens and unauthorized immigration. And given the political climate at the time, Congress stepped in and said, no, you can't do that. Their reasoning was that they wanted the terminology to match what was in the law, the federal laws. But this is the first time that Congress ever stepped in when the library tried to change a subject heading. With President Biden's proposal to replace aliens with non-citizens in immigration laws, there's a lot of hope that this will change. It hasn't changed yet. I was really hoping that on the 5th anniversary of when they tried to change it before, that they would change it, but it hasn't happened. Technically, the Librarian of Congress could change it, but she didn't. And my guess is that probably there was a lot of pressure from Congress and probably some funding issues and threats concerning funding. But that's not to say that there aren't some positive changes in subject headings. And this kind of shows, now we use African Americans or Blacks. Previously, it was Afro-Americans, and back in the 70s, it was Negroes. Those were the terms. So subject headings change with how language changes. However, Library of Congress doesn't just jump on the most current term, because I mean, as somebody else said recently, queer is a term that some people find offensive and some people fully embrace. So the library is more careful or deliberate about changing terms. And another example being people with mental disabilities, when the terms were previously mentally handicapped or retarded persons. So, there are many other changes. I've had people ask me about the illegal aliens change and say, well, they don't do that very often. Well, actually, the Library of Congress changes different subject headings on a very regular basis, but usually they're not very controversial. So people that are not catalogers don't hear about it. Now, the classification dilemma, this problem is not a problem with ebooks because ebooks don't sit on a shelf. But as long as we have print books in our libraries, this will be a problem. Because most books cover multiple subjects, even if they're within a broad overall subject. And you can only put a book in one place on the shelf unless you're going to buy multiple copies and class it in as many numbers as you have subject headings, which I don't think any of us have the budget or the shelf space in our libraries to do such a thing. So by selecting a call number, that automatically devalues the subjects, but it's something that we have to do. And with patrons shelf browsing, not so much during this pandemic, but a lot of times patrons will find one or two books in the catalog and then they'll go to the shelf to look for others. And if there's something that's shelved somewhere else, they may not see it. So I have a couple of examples. And I'm going to launch a poll. Okay. So where would you class this book? Women of the Depression, Caste and Culture in San Antonio, 1929 to 1939. Some possible, just based on the title, some possible subjects to classify with would be women's history, Depression of 1929, or San Antonio history. So, I like having interactive presentations. So where would you think, and I'm not sure how many, okay, there are 9 people here. So just give y'all a couple more minutes. Okay, so it looks okay. Everybody's voted. Thank you for participating. And most people said women's history, with San Antonio coming in close. And so let me close that. So the answer is actually it's women's history by city. So it's kind of a trick question in that it is San Antonio, but it's very specific San Antonio in terms of women's history and feminism. But that would be HQ 1439. But if you put it in the other sections, it would be an HB or it would be an F. So if someone was doing research on either the Depression or San Antonio, if they don't know about that book, or if they're shelf browsing, they may not see it. So, it's difficult to see. I mean, that's one of the dilemmas, but you've got to put it somewhere. And then I've got one other one. This is a very good book that we just read in our diversity book club here at the library. Algorithms of Oppression: How Search Engines Reinforce Racism. So just based on the title, there's computer algorithms, there's discrimination, or search engines. So let's see, where did the polling button go? Okay, let's see. Wait, that's not, okay, now. Okay, so where would you think that this title might be? Just a couple more. All right, so it looks like most people said discrimination, and search engines came up close behind. So I promise there are no more quizzes. The it's actually under search engines, and this call number is also for internet searching and social aspects. So that's where it would be. Now, the other options, well, Google is what the book was mainly about. So if somebody put it under Google, that's pretty close to where the other number was. So somebody probably would find it if they're shelf browsing, unless you've just got a huge collection that spans many shelves or many sections of shelving. But that's in the Z's. If you're going to put it in discrimination, that's in the H's, HM's, and computer algorithms are in math and computer science and QA. So, you know, those are examples of the problem with classification. But like I said, it has to be done. But that's where cataloger's judgment is important. You have to be able to look at what you have and see, you know, if your library or your school has like if your university or college has a big program in computer science, then that circs more than, say, discrimination. If you're looking at your collection development, you know, for your collection, you might decide to put it in the QAs, and that's not wrong. The subject headings are still in the records, so people can find, you know, clicking on the subject headings, they can find other titles that are close to other subject headings. But that's you know, the classification dilemma is a necessary evil, but it's also something where you need a cataloger to decide sometimes where the best place in your collection for an item is. The other classification dilemma is cuttering. And a problem that a lot of people don't talk about is the N4 problem. If we go back a few minutes ago when I mentioned that that African Americans is now the preferred term, but previously back in the 70s and before, the term was Negroes. Well, N4 is a holdover from that. But it's really easy to update subject headings sometimes because you can do it as a batch edit. Whereas if you're changing the call number labels because of something like the cutter number or something else, that's more labor intensive. It requires more human resources as well as physical resources, because you might have to pull items from the stack if you're not handling something currently in hand. And you'll have to relabel things. You'll have to update the catalog, and that may be either just the bib record or it could be the holdings record, you know, depending on your system. And depending on how many items you change, there may need to be some shifting in the stacks that needs to be done. So this is a bigger problem in some instances than just devaluing subjects by choosing a call number. My example for this is the book Soul Liberty, The Evolution of Black Religious Politics in Post-Emancipation Virginia. As you can see, the subject headings have been updated to African American, but the call number still has N4. And, you know, a lot of times the cutter refers to the author's last name, but there are plenty of instances where, as many of you probably know, that it refers to a subject division. And you might think, okay, maybe somebody won't really notice that, but that's not the case, because if you look at what else would be on the shelf, it doesn't take a rocket scientist or an astronaut to figure out if there are other books in this call number scheme. It doesn't take much to figure out that the first cutter is referring to sections of the population. So, you know, that could be very offensive to someone searching for a book, and rightly so. But there are about 50 instances, give or take a few, of N4. And when I say N4, sometimes because of shelf listing, it may be N3 or it may be N4-5, but somewhere in that range. There are roughly about 50 instances of this still in the Library of Congress classification. And this was not an old book. If I go back, see, that book was published in 2020. So it's not even a case of, oh, well, it's a book from the 70s. This is still being used in 2020. So I have one of my resources at the end is a link to a list that someone did of all the instances of N4 still in Library of Congress classification. But, you know, this is another problem that we need catalogers to fix. And so, you know, it's another point for advocating for the work that we do as being important. So that pretty much, those are my examples. I don't know why, but sometimes when I do this presentation, it takes me 45 minutes. Sometimes it takes me 15 minutes. I have expanded it some because actually the first time I gave it, I had to give it as a lightning talk. But as I said in the beginning, my intent here is to empower you or empower your staff to kind of explain the importance of what you do to people who don't necessarily understand the ins and outs. I have a great associate dean. I mean, she's one of the best bosses I've ever worked for. Cataloging bores her to tears. If I start talking in terms of, well, authority record this or mark tag, you know, her eyes just glaze over. She really liked when I did the poster because I hung it up in my office for a while, and she was able to read it and look at it, and, you know, and she had been head of tech services long enough to understand the importance of cataloging, but she liked the way that I explained it. And I figure if I can explain it to my parents and they understand it, you know, maybe I'm onto something here. You know, in today's society, attention spans are very short. So create an elevator speech. If you like these examples, use them. You know, still my material. But, you know, if you find other examples, or if you're wanting to drive home a point to a certain audience, use these methods to find some examples of your own. If you just really feel the burning need to talk about authority files and authority records and the importance of having name authority records, use the example of Michael Jackson. I mean, there are more than 40 Michael Jacksons in the Library of Congress name authority file. 3 of them at least are musicians. If you don't have authorized names, imagine how many records patrons might have to look through if either the subject or the author or creator was just Michael Jackson. So, you know, if you want to talk about authorities, find an example that like Michael Jackson or William Shakespeare, or, you know, or if you have somebody local who has written something but has a fairly common name, because I mean, you know, Michael is a fairly common male name and Jackson is a fairly common surname. So, you know, if there's somebody local, use that as an example. But like I said, I'm very passionate about this because I think the work we do is important. I don't think that the work that we do can be totally done by computers. So, you know, I would love to hear if you have some thoughts on examples or if you have questions. These are my resources. Change the subject. If you haven't seen it, I put it in here because this is a documentary about when the Library of Congress tried to change the subject heading from illegal aliens. It actually started out as a request from some students at Dartmouth. So it's not a long documentary. It might be an hour and a half. I think it's just an hour, but it's very interesting about the people that were involved in it. And then the second resource is, like I said, it's every occurrence of N4 in the Library of Congress. And then if you want some other examples, that's the article that I wrote that my mother thinks is last week's news, or in this case, it's a couple of years old. So I guess it's last year's news. So I thank you for your time and I thank you for attending, and I will take any questions or comments.
Thank you for your presentation, Amanda. Just as a reminder, people are welcome to unmute themselves if they have a question, or you're welcome to drop it into the chat as well.
I'll pull up the chat. Okay. No questions yet. And my contact information is here. So, you know, if you have any follow-up questions or comments, I appreciate critical feedback. If you think it sucked, I'd appreciate you telling me why it sucked. But
Amanda, I did have a question. I was wondering what advice you would give for non-catalogers in terms of advocating for changes to some of these problems that you've brought to light today.
Well, you know, you can contact, I mean, you know, a lot like the example of Dartmouth, the students got together with the librarians and said, you know, this is wrong. How do we do this? And the cataloging librarians approached Library of Congress because, of course, with any institution, you know, there's a policy or steps that you have to do to get something done, a procedure. So, and then there's also a website called the Cataloging Lab that is a crowdsourced place to suggest changes, because not just any library can suggest changes. Or so the Cataloging Lab is a place where you can see what changes have been suggested, or a running list of things that subject headings that people think need to change. Another big one is Indians of North America. That's still the subject heading. It has not been changed to Native Americans. It has not been changed to Indigenous peoples. And there's a movement at a lot of libraries, especially tribal libraries, to use the tribal names that the tribes themselves refer to themselves as.
Thank you. I'm definitely going to check out that cataloging lab. Any questions for Amanda?
You give me just a second. I'll see if I can pull it up real quick. There we go. Okay. I don't know. Am I still sharing?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, it's just cataloginglab.org. And they're they have frequently asked questions and subjects that they're trying to get changed or think need to be changed. So I may add that to my slides for the next time, but it's cataloginglab.org.
Megan was asking if you could drop the link to your 2019 article in the chat.
Yes. Let's see. If I can get my mouse to work. Let's see. I thank y'all for the comments, and if you have other questions or comments, and if you need any follow-up information, please feel free to reach out. And I appreciate you attending. I'm just curious, are any of you administrators, or are you mostly catalogers or tech services people? I'm always curious to know if any administrators come, since part of what I'm trying to do is help explain what you do. Okay, Georgia says she's a director. So well, I hope that it was helpful. I'm passionate about being a cataloger or metadata librarian. I like seeing, I've done public services. I am glad that there are people who feel called to public services because it's not my area of expertise. So, one of my colleagues and I used to joke, she's like, I worked in cataloging and I hated it. I'm like, well, I did public services and I just didn't care for it. So, we were glad that we had each other so that they could do the jobs that we didn't want to do. So.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us, Amanda.
Well, thank you.
You were saying in terms of, it's nice to have examples to talk to students about in terms of problematics in our catalog.
So, yeah, this is one way to find examples. And one of the examples that I no longer put in because it's a hot button topic, but there's definitely also a Christian bias to the Library of Congress subject headings. My first degree is in theology from a Catholic university, but there's all sorts of Buddhist mythology subject headings as an example, but there's no Christian mythology. And if you start looking at religious subject headings, Christianity is assumed, and other faiths are not assumed. So that's another one, depending on your audience. So thank you again, and please feel free to reach out if you have any follow-up questions or comments.
Thank you.
And I will send this to